Clint Eastwood stopped his Oscar speech when he saw an elderly woman collapse in the back row. When he realized who she was, what he did next made the entire Academy cry. It was February 27, 2005, at the Kodak Theater in Los Angeles. The 77th Academy Awards ceremony was reaching its climax, the culmination of months of campaigning, speculation, and celebration. Million Dollar Baby had already won Best Picture, and now Clint Eastwood was walking to the stage to accept his fourth Oscar, this time for Best Director. The standing ovation lasted nearly 2 minutes. 3,000 of Hollywood's most powerful people were on their feet, applauding a 74-year-old legend who had just directed one of the most emotionally devastating films in cinema history. The orchestra swelled. Cameras captured every angle. Morgan Freeman had won Best Supporting Actor. Hilary Swank had won Best Actress. The night belonged entirely to Clint. He reached the microphone, holding the golden statue, and waited for the applause to die down. The orchestra had stopped playing. The teleprompter was ready with his prepared remarks. Cameras from around the world were focused on his weathered face. "Thank you," Clint began, his voice carrying that distinctive gravelly quality. "This is unexpected and humbling. I've been making movies for over 40 years, and—" He stopped mid-sentence. His eyes had caught something in the audience, far back in the orchestra section. Movement, commotion, someone falling. Most people in the theater didn't notice. They were focused on Clint, on the stage, on the celebration, but Clint's attention had shifted completely. He put the Oscar down on the podium and took a step forward, squinting into the lights to see better. "Excuse me," he said into the microphone, then walked away from it. The audience murmured in confusion. The director in the production booth frantically signaled to cameras. What was happening? Was this part of his speech? Clint walked to the edge of the stage, looking out into the orchestra section. Security personnel were already moving toward the back rows where someone had collapsed. But Clint wasn't waiting for security. He stepped off the stage, ignoring the steps, just stepping down directly into the aisle. At 74 years old, moving with purpose that surprised everyone watching. "Clint, what are you doing?" someone whispered urgently as he passed, but he didn't respond. He was walking quickly up the aisle toward the back of the theater, toward the commotion, toward whoever had fallen. The entire Kodak Theater watched in stunned silence as their Best Director winner abandoned his Oscar moment and headed into the audience. What nobody in that theater knew was that in the back row, in one of the least expensive seats in the house, an 82-year-old woman named Dorothy Abrams had been watching Clint's moment with tears of pride streaming down her face when her heart had suddenly seized and she'd collapsed into her seat. Dorothy Abrams wasn't famous. She wasn't a producer or studio executive. Most people in that theater had never heard of her. But 43 years earlier, Dorothy Abrams had been a casting director at CBS television, and she had made a decision that changed cinema history. In 1962, a tall young actor with a distinctive squint had walked into her office for what felt like his 100th failed audition. He'd been rejected by every studio in Hollywood. Too tall, too quiet, wrong look for television, wrong everything, according to the casting directors who'd turned him away week after week. He was days away from giving up acting entirely and going back to digging swimming pools in the San Fernando Valley. Dorothy had looked at this young man, Clint Eastwood, and seen something nobody else had seen. A quiet intensity, an authenticity, a presence. She'd cast him in a small role on Rawhide. That role became a series regular. That series regular became a star. That star became a legend. Clint had never forgotten. Every Oscar he'd won, every premiere he'd attended, every major moment of his career, he'd sent Dorothy an invitation. She'd attended a few over the years, always sitting in the back, never making a fuss, just proud to watch the man she'd believed in succeed. Tonight was different. At 82, with a weak heart and limited mobility, Dorothy almost hadn't come. But this was Clint's fourth Oscar. This was Million Dollar Baby. She'd read the script he'd sent her months ago, had watched him pour his soul into this film about redemption and sacrifice. She had to be there. She'd bought her own ticket, one of the cheapest seats in the house, in the back orchestra section. She'd told no one she was coming. She just wanted to watch from a distance, to be present for his moment. When Clint had started his speech, Dorothy had felt her chest tighten with emotion and pride. She'd started this. In a small office 43 years ago, she'd looked at a desperate young man and said yes when everyone else said no. The heart attack came suddenly. One moment she was crying with joy, the next moment everything went dark. Now Clint Eastwood was running up the aisle toward her. He reached the back row where paramedics were already attending to Dorothy. Her friend Margaret, who'd driven her to the ceremony, was crying, explaining to security that Dorothy needed immediate help. "Let me through," Clint said, his voice carrying an authority that made people instinctively move aside. He knelt beside Dorothy's seat. Her eyes were closed, her breathing shallow. The paramedics were checking her vitals, preparing to move her. "Ma'am," one paramedic said to Margaret, "do you know her medical history?" Before Margaret could answer, Clint spoke. "Her name is Dorothy Abrams. She's 82 years old. She has a heart condition, congestive heart failure. She's on medication for it, I don't know which specific ones, but she's being treated at Cedars-Sinai." Everyone looked at Clint in surprise. How did he know this? "Dorothy?" Clint said softly, taking her hand. "Dorothy, it's Clint. I'm here. You're going to be okay." Dorothy's eyes fluttered open. For a moment she didn't understand what she was seeing. Why was Clint Eastwood kneeling beside her? Why wasn't he on stage? "Clint," she whispered, confused. "Your speech, your Oscar, is still there," Clint said gently. "It's not going anywhere. But you are. We need to get you to a hospital." "No," Dorothy said weakly. "You can't. This is your moment. Go back, please." "Dorothy," Clint said, and his voice cracked slightly. "You gave me my moment, 43 years ago in a CBS office when you were the only person who saw something in me. Everything I've done, every film I've made, every award I've won, it started because you said yes. So no, I'm not going back to that stage. I'm going with you." By now, the entire theater had realized something significant was happening. The broadcast had cut to commercial, but inside the Kodak Theater, 3,000 people were watching Clint Eastwood hold an elderly woman's hand in the back row. Morgan Freeman had come up the aisle. So had Hilary Swank. They stood back, giving space, but present. "The ambulance is here," a paramedic said. "We need to transport her now." "I'm coming with you," Clint said. "Sir, only family." "I'm coming with you," Clint repeated, in a tone that made it clear this wasn't negotiable. They loaded Dorothy onto a gurney. Clint walked beside her as they wheeled her out of the theater. As they passed through the lobby, he looked back once at the stage where his Oscar sat abandoned on the podium. Then he kept walking. At Cedars-Sinai Medical Center, Clint sat in the emergency room waiting area, still wearing his tuxedo, while Dorothy underwent treatment. Margaret sat beside him, explaining through tears how much Dorothy had talked about this night, how proud she'd been, how she'd insisted on coming despite her health. "She never told you she was coming?" Margaret asked. "No," Clint said. "Dorothy never makes a fuss. She just shows up, quietly. That's how she's always been." 3 hours later, a doctor emerged. Dorothy had suffered a significant cardiac event, but she'd stabilized. She would need surgery, but she would survive. "Can I see her?" Clint asked. "She's asking for you," the doctor said. In the hospital room, Dorothy looked small and fragile in the bed, connected to various monitors, but her eyes were alert. "You left your Oscar," she said as soon as Clint entered. "They'll mail it to me," Clint replied, pulling a chair beside her bed. "Clint, I'm so sorry. I ruined your night." "Dorothy?" Clint said, taking her hand again. "Do you remember what you told me in 1962? When you gave me that role on Rawhide?" Dorothy thought for a moment. I said you had something the camera would love, that you just needed someone to give you a chance." "No," Clint said. "That's what you said to CBS. But do you remember what you said to me after the audition when everyone else had left the room?" Dorothy's eyes filled with tears. "I said, the thing about chances is, they're only worth something if you're there to see them through. So don't waste this one." "Don't waste this one," Clint repeated. "Dorothy, I've spent 43 years trying to live up to that, trying to make sure that the chance you gave me meant something. Every film I've directed, every risk I've taken, every time I've chosen the harder path, it's been because you taught me that chances are sacred, that when someone believes in you, you owe it to them to believe in yourself." Dorothy was crying now. You did that. You became extraordinary. Because you saw it first, Clint said. So no, you didn't ruin my night. You gave me the only thing that matters, perspective. What's an Oscar compared to making sure you're okay? What's a speech compared to being here? But everyone was watching, Dorothy said. The whole world. Let them watch, Clint said. Let them see that some things matter more than awards. Let them see that loyalty isn't something you turn on for cameras and turn off when it's inconvenient. Over the next 3 days, while Dorothy underwent heart surgery and recovered, Clint visited every day. He brought her flowers, read her scripts, told her stories about the making of $1 Million Baby. He made sure she had the best cardiac care available, quietly covering costs her insurance wouldn't handle. On the 4th day, when Dorothy was finally strong enough to have more visitors, Clint did something that surprised her. He brought her Oscar. "This belongs to you as much as it belongs to me," he said, placing it on her hospital table. "In fact, it belongs to you more, because without you, none of this exists." Dorothy touched the golden statue with trembling fingers. "I can't accept this." "You're not accepting it. You're just holding it, reminding yourself that 43 years ago, you changed a life. You changed my life." The media eventually learned what had happened. The images of Clint leaving the Oscars mid-speech, walking up the aisle, riding in an ambulance, they became some of the most iconic moments in Academy Awards history. Not for the glamour, but for what they represented. The Academy, in an unprecedented move, invited Clint to deliver his acceptance speech at the following year's ceremony. He did, but only on one condition. Dorothy Abrams sat in the front row. When that night came, Clint stood at the podium with Dorothy seated front and center, and he gave a speech that had nothing to do with the film he'd directed and everything to do with the woman who'd believed in him. "This industry loves to celebrate moments," Clint said. "The moment an actor breaks through, the moment a film captures lightning, the moment a performance transcends. But we forget that behind every moment is a person who saw potential when nobody else did. Dorothy Abrams is that person for me." In 1962, she was a junior casting director who had no reason to take a chance on a struggling actor who'd been rejected by everyone else. But she did. And everything that followed, every film, every award, every moment, exists because one person chose to believe. The standing ovation Dorothy received that night lasted longer than any acceptance speech. Dorothy Abrams lived for 7 more years after that Oscar night. She passed away in 2012 at the age of 89. At her funeral, Clint gave the eulogy and revealed something that few people knew. For 43 years, he'd sent Dorothy a percentage of his earnings from every film he'd made. Not as payment, but as partnership, because in his mind, she'd been his partner from the beginning. "The industry keeps asking me about legacy," Clint said at her funeral. "What do I want to be remembered for? What defines my career?" And I always think about Dorothy. Because my legacy isn't the films. It's remembering the people who made the films possible. It's stopping an Oscar speech because someone who believed in you needs help. It's understanding that gratitude isn't a feeling. It's a practice. Today, at the Academy of Motion Picture Arts and Sciences headquarters, there's a small plaque in the lobby that reads, "In memory of Dorothy Abrams, casting director, who saw potential where others saw only obstacles, and in honor of Clint Eastwood, who remembered, some moments matter more than Oscars." The Oscar that Clint won that night, the one he abandoned on stage to run to Dorothy, eventually made it to his home. But it doesn't sit on a shelf with his other awards. It sits on his desk where he works on scripts, next to a framed photo of a young actor and an older casting director in a CBS office in 1962. Because the story of that Oscar isn't about the speech he gave or the film he directed. It's about the moment he chose to remember that before he was a legend, he was just a struggling actor who needed someone to believe in him. And when that someone needed him, he didn't hesitate. The Academy Awards have seen plenty of memorable speeches. They've seen tears and laughter and political statements. But they've never seen anything quite like the night Clint Eastwood taught Hollywood that sometimes the most important thing you can do with your moment is give it to someone else. If this story of gratitude and remembrance moved you, subscribe and share it with someone who needs to remember that the people who believed in you when you were nobody deserve to be honored when you're somebody. Have you ever had someone give you a chance that changed your life? Share their name in the comments. Ring that bell for more stories about legends who understood that character is measured by who you remember when everyone's watching.